She wasn't supposed to be in that house. Adaeze Chukwu stood at the gates of a mansion so large it looked like it belonged in a movie, clutching a folder of papers that said she'd been hired as a part-time domestic assistant. Not a nanny, not a bodyguard, not someone who would spend the next few weeks of her life inside the coldest, most heavily guarded home in Seoul. She didn't know that yet. She only knew 3 things. The agency had mixed up her paperwork, the pay was absurdly generous for light housekeeping duties, and the man standing at the top of the marble steps, arms folded, staring at her like she was a math problem he hadn't solved yet, looked nothing like a man who needed a housekeeper. He looked like a man who needed an army. "You're late," he said, in accented but precise English. "Traffic," Adaeze said brightly. "Also, your street doesn't exist on Google Maps." I had to ask 3 different men in black suits for directions. Very helpful men. Very serious men. Do they moonlight as security guards or something? The man's jaw tightened. Something like that. Question 1. Why did a shipping company executive need 6 armed men patrolling his driveway? Question 2. Why did the little girl peeking out from behind his leg flinch every time a car door slammed? Question 3. Why, when Adaeze shook the man's hand, did she feel calluses that belonged to someone who didn't spend his life behind a desk? She noticed none of it. Not really. She was too busy being delighted by the chandelier in the foyer, which she was fairly sure cost more than her entire neighborhood in Lagos. Before we go further, hi, welcome. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this story. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from tonight, because this community is truly global and it makes my heart so full. If you love slow burn romance, hidden identities, and stories that'll have you laughing 1 minute and crying the next, hit subscribe, because trust me, this one gets so much more emotional later. Okay, back to Adaeze, who has no idea what she just walked into. His name was Han Do-yeon. To the world, he was the 34-year-old CEO of Doyon Maritime Holdings, a shipping and logistics conglomerate that moved cargo across half of Asia. To the 12 men currently stationed around his property, he was boss. To the underworld of Seoul, he was something else entirely. A name people didn't say above a whisper, attached to a legacy of blood and control that had been built by his father and inherited, reluctantly, by him. None of that mattered right now. What mattered was the 6-year-old girl gripping his trouser leg, refusing to let go, refusing to speak to anyone since the night 3 weeks ago when men in ski masks had broken into her nursery. Her name was Seo-Yeon. She was his niece. Her parents, his older brother and sister-in-law, were gone, and the official story was a car accident. The real story was a message, sent by a rival organization, delivered in the cruelest way possible. Do-yeon had pulled her out of school, out of her old house, out of anything resembling normal life, and hidden her here, behind walls 3 feet thick and a small army of men whose only job was to make sure history didn't repeat itself. What Seo-Yeon needed, according to every doctor and therapist he'd consulted, was warmth, stability, someone who felt safe. What Do-yeon needed was someone with 0 connections to his world, someone untraceable, someone the rival family would never think to look for. The agency had sent him a stack of 12 resumes. He'd thrown out 11. Adaeze Chukwu's file was thin, a few years of childcare work back home, glowing references, a photo of her laughing so hard her eyes had disappeared. There was something about that photograph, something unguarded. He'd told himself it was a professional decision. It wasn't entirely, but he'd never admit that. "This is Seo-Yeon," he said now, nodding at the little girl. "She doesn't talk much." "That's okay," Adaeze said, crouching down to the girl's height without a hint of hesitation. "I talk enough for 2 people. Sometimes 3. My grandmother used to say I came out of the womb already gossiping." Seo-Yeon didn't smile, but she didn't hide either. That, Do-yeon noted silently, was more than anyone else had managed in 3 weeks. "Housekeeping duties," he said, handing Adaeze a folded paper. "You'll manage her schedule. Meals, homeschooling with the tutor, bedtime. You do not leave the property with her. You do not discuss this household with anyone outside it. You do not ask questions about the men outside." Adaeze blinked. "Are those butler rules or bodyguard rules?" "Household rules," he said smoothly. "Right," she said, nodding slowly, filing it away as billionaire eccentricity. Rich people were strange. Her aunt back in Lagos had once refused to let anyone touch her good plates. This was probably the same energy, just with more zeros attached. She had absolutely no idea. The first week, Ada decided, was the most bizarre workplace experience of her entire life, and she used to work at a wedding hall that once double-booked a funeral. There were men, quiet, muscular men in dark suits, stationed at every entrance. When she asked one of them, a younger guy named Minjun, what exactly he did, he'd gone pale and said, "Facilities." "Facilities," she repeated. "Interesting. Very buff facilities department you have here." There was a room on the second floor she wasn't allowed into. When she'd knocked, thinking it might be a linen closet, a voice on the other side had barked something in rapid Korean, and a man had appeared out of nowhere to gently, but firmly, redirect her. "Server room," he'd said. "Very sensitive equipment. Servers that need a man standing guard with what I'm choosing to believe was not a gun tucked into his jacket." Ada muttered to herself, walking away. "Okay, tech company problems. I don't understand tech people." Every night, before Seo-Yeon went to sleep, 2 guards did a slow walk around the perimeter of the house with flashlights. Ada watched from the kitchen window, sipping tea. "Very thorough alarm system," she said to the cook, an older woman named Halmoni Choi who barely spoke English but had taken an immediate, fierce liking to Ada. "In my country, we just have one dog and a prayer." Halmoni Choi laughed so hard she nearly dropped a ladle. What Ada didn't see, because she wasn't meant to, was the surveillance monitors in the server room tracking every vehicle on the street for 3 blocks. She didn't see the encrypted calls Diyun took at 2 a.m., his voice dropping into something cold and commanding that had nothing to do with shipping containers. She didn't see the gun in the drawer of his desk, or the way he checked it was still there every single morning like a ritual. She saw a tired man who worked too much and a little girl who flinched at loud noises. And slowly, without meaning to, she started falling into a rhythm with both of them. Seo-Yeon's first word to Ada came on day 9. They were in the garden, one of the only outdoor spaces Ada was permitted to take her, and Ada had been narrating an elaborate, entirely made-up story about a stubborn Nigerian goat who refused to be herded by anyone except a very confused white man from a church mission. And the goat, Ada said, waving her arms, looked him dead in the eye, and walked into the church. During service, sat in the front pew like he paid tithes. A small, surprised laugh burst out of Seo-Yeon before she could stop it. Ada froze, afraid to make a big deal of it, afraid the moment would shatter like glass if she looked at it too directly. So she just kept going, telling the story like nothing miraculous had happened at all, while her heart did somersaults. That evening, she found Dune standing in the hallway outside the girl's room, unmoving, an unreadable look on his face. "She laughed today," he said quietly. "It wasn't quite a question." "She did," Ada said. "About a goat." Long story. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked, for just a second, like relief, so deep it bordered on pain. "Thank you," he said, and walked away before she could respond. Ada stood there a long moment, unsettled by how much that small, stiff, "thank you," had meant to her. The misunderstandings piled up like laundry. There was the night she found a man cleaning what she was certain was a very realistic toy gun in the kitchen and calmly told him that Seo-Yeon was too young for war-themed hobbies, prompting the man to nearly choke on his own tongue before Diyun, overhearing from the hallway, had to physically leave the room to keep from laughing for the first time in what felt like years. There was the afternoon she discovered a hidden panic room disguised as a wine cellar and assumed, with total confidence, that Mr. Han was simply one of those doomsday prepper types, and spent the next hour lecturing him gently about food expiration dates. "You should really rotate your stock," she told him over dinner. "I read an article. Beans go bad." Diyun, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, said only, "I'll take that under advisement." There was the day 2 men showed up at the gate with what were very clearly rifle cases, and Ada, watching from the window, turned to Halmoni Choi and said, "Golf clubs. Rich men and their golf clubs." And Halmoni Choi had to leave the room entirely. The audience knows. We all know. Ada does not know. And honestly, that's the fun of it. But underneath the comedy, something quieter was growing. It was in the way Diyun started coming home earlier, just to catch the last 20 minutes of Seo-Yeon's bedtime story. It was in the way Ada started leaving a cup of tea on his desk every night at 11, because she'd noticed the light stayed on that late, and figured a man that tired needed something warm in his hands. It was in the way he started, almost against his will, telling her small true things, that his mother had died when he was young, that he'd never wanted this house, this life, any of it, that Seo-Yeon was the only family he had left that still felt uncomplicated. He never told her the rest. He couldn't. Every time he came close, the reality of what he was, what danger simply existing near him carried, stopped the words in his throat. "You're very serious for a shipping man," Adaeze told him one night. 3 weeks in, both of them sitting on the back porch after Seo-Yeon had finally gone to sleep without needing 3 stories and a song. "Shipping is a serious business," he said. "Is it though?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Because sometimes I think you're actually a secret agent. Or a K-drama villain. You have that broody, tortured energy." He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes that she couldn't name. "Maybe I am," he said quietly, and she laughed, because obviously he was joking. He wasn't. "If you're enjoying this so far, this is usually where I'd remind you. The story gets a lot more intense from here. Stick with me. Comment your prediction for what Adaze's about to find out, because I promise you, it is not what you're expecting." The truth came apart the way truths usually do, not in one dramatic reveal, but in a series of cracks that finally gave way all at once. It started with a name. Adaeze was tidying the study, technically off limits, but Deun had left the door open and she'd only meant to close the window before the rain came in, when she saw the newspaper article sitting open on his desk. It was in Korean, mostly, but there was a photo she recognized instantly. Deun, younger, standing beside an older man with the same sharp jaw, the same guarded eyes. Beneath it, in English subtitle text someone had printed for translation purposes, a single line jumped out at her. "Han Sung-ho, alleged head of the Biko crime syndicate, found dead in an apparent assassination." Adaeze stared at it for a long moment, her brain trying and failing to make it fit into any innocent explanation. Newspaper clipping. Alleged crime syndicate. His father's face. His face. Rich people, she told herself, hands trembling slightly as she set the paper back exactly where she'd found it. Rich people collect strange things. Maybe it's for a documentary. Maybe. "What are you doing in here?" She spun around. Deun stood in the doorway, and for the first time since she'd met him, there was something in his face that actually frightened her. Not anger, but a kind of raw, exposed fear, like a man watching a door he'd spent years bracing shut finally start to open. "The window," she said weakly. "I was closing the window." His eyes went to the desk, to the article. Understanding and dread moved across his face. "Adaeze, you don't have to explain," she said quickly, backing toward the door, her voice climbing half an octave the way it did when she was panicking and pretending not to. "It's fine. Family history. Everybody's got skeletons. My uncle back home stole a goat once. We don't talk about it." "Adaeze." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her cold. "Sit down." And for the first time since she'd arrived in that beautiful, terrifying house, Han Deun told her the truth. He told her about his father, about the empire built on fear that he'd been born into and never chosen. He told her about the men outside, not facility staff, not security consultants, but soldiers, men whose loyalty was bought with blood and money in equal measure. He told her about the rival syndicate, the Choi family, who had spent the last year trying to seize territory his father had once controlled, and about the night 3 weeks ago when they'd sent men into his brother's house to make their intentions violently, permanently clear. He told her Seo-Yeon's silence wasn't shyness. It was trauma. He told her that the server room held surveillance for the entire block, that the golf clubs were rifles, that every single misunderstanding she'd laughed off over the past 3 weeks had a much darker, realer answer underneath it. Adaeze sat very still through all of it, her earlier jokes replaying in her mind with a sick new clarity. The goat story suddenly felt very far away. "Why?" she said finally, quietly. "Would you hire someone like me? Someone with no idea what she was walking into?" "Because that's exactly why," Deun said. "Anyone connected to my world would be a target the moment they walked through that gate. I needed someone the choice would never think to look for. Someone real. Someone who could make Seo-Yeon laugh again without carrying my world's poison into her life. So I was, what, a strategic hire." Her voice cracked slightly on the word, hurt sneaking in before she could stop it. "At first," he admitted. Then, quieter, Not anymore. The air between them went very still. I should have told you sooner, he said. I know that. I told myself it was to protect you. Maybe it was also because I didn't want you to look at me the way people look at me when they know. How's that? Afraid? Ada looked at him for a long moment. At the tired eyes, the careful hands, the man who checked on a sleeping little girl every night like she was the only good thing he had left in the world, and found, to her own surprise, that fear wasn't what she felt. I'm not afraid of you, she said slowly. I'm afraid for you. There's a difference. Something in his shoulders, tense for 3 straight weeks, eased just slightly. Everything changed after that night. Not the routines, exactly, but the honesty underneath them. Ada still made him tea at 11. She still told Seo-Yeon ridiculous stories about goats and confused missionaries. But now she understood the weight behind the silences, the reason for the flashlights sweeping the garden every night, the reason Diyun's hand sometimes drifted, instinctively, toward his jacket when a car idled too long outside the gate. She started noticing him, too, not the danger around him, but him, the exhaustion he carried like armor, the rare, unguarded smile that appeared only around Seo-Yeon and, increasingly, around her. The way he'd started asking about her life back home, her family, the goat uncle, actually listening like the answers mattered. Tell me something happy, he said one night, the two of them on the back porch again, Seo-Yeon's window dark above them. Something with no danger in it at all. So she told him about Lagos, the noise of it, the color, the way her mother sold fabric in the market and could haggle a man out of his own shirt. She told him about wanting, as a little girl, to be a teacher, and how becoming a nanny had felt like a smaller version of that dream that she'd made peace with. She told him about laughter as survival, about choosing joy on purpose every single day, because the alternative was letting the hard things win. He listened like she was telling him a secret worth more than anything in his ledgers. You're the first thing in this house that doesn't feel like it's about to break, he admitted quietly. I break plenty, she said, smiling. I just do it where nobody's watching. Then I hope you'll let me watch, sometimes, he said, and it was the closest thing to a confession either of them had allowed yet. The danger, when it came fast. It was a Tuesday. Ada would remember that detail forever, how ordinary the day had started, when the quiet perimeter patrols suddenly weren't quiet anymore. She heard it before she understood it. Raised voices at the gate, the screech of tires, Minjun's radio crackling with words she didn't understand but recognized the tone of immediately. Panic. Diyun burst into the nursery where she was reading to Seo-Yeon, his face carved from stone. Choi's men are on the street. They found us. Found us how? No time. He was already moving, sweeping Seo-Yeon into his arms with a gentleness that contradicted the urgency in every other part of him. Ada, the panic room. Now, the wine cellar that wasn't a wine cellar. Of course. They moved fast through the house, Diyun barking orders in Korean to the men falling into position around them. Seo-Yeon's small arms locked around his neck, silent and shaking. Ada's heart hammered against her ribs. Every joke she'd made about doomsday prepping and canned beans rising up to mock her. The steel door of the panic room sealed behind the three of them with a heavy, final sound. Through the monitor mounted on the wall, real monitors, she understood now, not servers, she watched grainy footage of black SUVs pulling up outside the gate. Men pouring out with weapons Ada had spent 3 weeks convincing herself were golf equipment. Stay here, Diyun said, moving toward the door. Ada grabbed his arm. You are not going out there. It's my house. My men. My responsibility. She just got her voice back. Ada said, nodding fiercely at Seo-Yeon, who was watching them both with wide, terrified eyes. She is not losing you too. I am not losing you. The words hung in the air, more honest than either of them had planned. Diyun's jaw tightened, torn between duty and something that had, somewhere in 3 short weeks, become just as powerful. I have men trained for this, Ada. I have to coordinate them, or we lose everything. Then coordinate from in here, she said. Please. For a long, suspended moment, he looked at her, really looked, and something settled in his decision. He pulled out a small radio instead, barking commands to Minjun and the others through it, directing the defense from inside the panic room instead of the front lines. It was the longest 20 minutes of Ada's life. Gunfire, distant and sharp, echoed faintly through the reinforced walls. Seo-Yeon buried her face in Ada's shoulder, and Ada held her, humming the goat's story under her breath like a lullaby, refusing to let her own fear leak into her voice. Dean stood at the monitor the entire time, radio in hand, every muscle coiled tight, until finally, Min Jun's voice crackled through. Clear. They're retreating. Police are 2 minutes out. The breath Dean let out sounded like it had been held for 3 weeks, not 20 minutes. In the chaos afterward, police statements, a bandaged graze on Min Jun's arm, the quiet, shaken relief of a household that had survived. Dean found Ada in the kitchen near midnight, making tea neither of them would drink, because her hands needed something to do. You could have left, he said quietly. Tonight. Any night before tonight. You still can. Are you asking me to? No. The word came out rough, more honest than he'd intended. I'm asking why you haven't. Ada set down the kettle. Because somewhere between the goat story and the fake wine cellar, I stopped seeing the danger first, she said. I started seeing you first. The real you. The one who sits up till 2 a.m. worrying about a little girl's nightmares. The one who thanked me like it cost him something, the first time she laughed. I'm not a safe person to love, Ada. I didn't ask for safe, she said softly. I asked for real. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and there was nothing careful about the way he took her face in his hands, like a man who'd been holding his breath for a very long time and had finally decided to stop. I love you, he said, plainly, without performance, the words landing heavier for how simply he said them. I have since the 2nd week, when you told my head of security his job title made him sound like a plumber. Ada laughed, wet-eyed and unguarded. I love you too, even though you let me believe rifles were golf clubs for 3 weeks. In my defense, he murmured, close enough now that the words were barely more than breath. You seemed so happy believing it. I'm happier now, she whispered, knowing all of you. The kiss that followed was quiet, and certain, and long overdue. The weeks after brought changes, quiet ones, the kind that matter more than fireworks. The Choi conflict didn't vanish overnight, but with police involvement, exposed evidence, and alliances Deun had spent years building for exactly this kind of moment, the threat shrank from an open war to a contained, manageable danger, the kind a careful man could finally breathe around. Seo-Yeon started sleeping through the night. She started drawing again, crayon goats, mostly, with wobbly church pews and a very confused stick figure missionary, which she proudly informed her uncle was Auntie Ada's favorite story. She's part of this family now, Deun told his niece one evening, watching Ada chase her around the garden in the fading gold light. Is that all right with you? Seo-Yeon, who hadn't spoken more than a handful of sentences in over a month, looked up at him with something like her old spark returning to her eyes. She's already family, the little girl said simply. She just didn't know it yet. Later that night, on the same back porch where the truth had first been told, Deun took Ada's hand in the dark. Marry me, he said. Not a question exactly. More a certainty he'd been carrying and finally set down. Ada laughed, startled, delighted, tears already threatening. You're serious. I told you, he said, the ghost of a smile finally reaching his tired eyes. Very serious for a shipping man. She kissed him instead of answering, which was answer enough, and somewhere above them, a small girl who'd once refused to speak pressed her face to the window, grinning so wide it hurt. Watching the family she'd almost lost become the family she'd never imagined finding. The goat story, Ada would tell her years later, was never really about a goat at all. It was about walking into somewhere you don't belong, and somehow, against every odd, finding your way home anyway. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. It truly means the world. If this story made you laugh, made you cry, or made your heart a little fuller, drop a comment below and tell me your favorite moment. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe, because there are so many more Afro-Korean love stories coming your way, and I would love to have you here for every single one of them. Until next time.